The São Paulo winter night was unforgiving, its cold air biting at any exposed skin. Yet, at the entrance of the grandiose ballroom, a bubble of impossible warmth and light pushed back against the darkness. Towering glass doors offered a glimpse into a world of pure opulence. Chandeliers dripped with crystal light, casting a golden glow on guests dressed in silk and velvet. The muffled sound of a string quartet playing a gentle waltz seeped through the glass, a delicate soundtrack to the polite laughter and clinking champagne flutes within. A plush red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, a sterile path meant to keep the grime of the real world from touching the polished shoes of the city's elite. It was a scene of breathtaking excess, a fortress of wealth designed to keep the harsh realities of the street, and perhaps of the heart, safely outside. Miguel Gomez stood at the edge of that red carpet, a king before the gates of a castle he had built, but in which he felt like a stranger. At 58, he wore his success like a perfectly tailored Italian tuxedo, flawless on the surface, but stiff and confining. His grey hair was styled with precision, but no amount of grooming could hide the deep-set exhaustion in his eyes or the permanent line of worry etched between his brows. He was the master of a supermarket empire, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, yet he felt a profound emptiness as he prepared to enter his own daughter's 15th birthday party. It was another transaction, another performance of the role he was expected to play. He took a deep breath, the cold air doing little to clear the fog of indifference, and prepared to take the first step into the light. But his foot froze mid-air. His gaze, which had been scanning the entrance for his wife, was snagged by a small figure huddled near a decorative marble pillar. It was a girl, no older than 11, her frame so slight she seemed almost swallowed by the night shadows. She wasn't begging or trying to sell her wares to the arriving guests. Instead, she was on her tiptoes, her small face pressed against the cold glass of a side window, utterly mesmerized by the fantasy world inside. Her clothes were thin and torn, and in her small hands she clutched a meager bouquet of roses. But it was her feet that struck Miguel with the force of a physical blow. They were bare, smudged with dirt, and pressed directly against the freezing stone pavement. That single, brutal detail shattered his composure, unlocking a door to a memory he had spent a lifetime trying to keep sealed shut. The carefully constructed world of Miguel Gomez, the billionaire, ceased to exist. The distant music, the approaching silhouette of his wife, the murmurs of the valets, it all faded into a dull, meaningless hum. All he could see, all he could feel, was the ghost of another little girl, another cold night, another pair of feet he couldn't protect. A profound, gut-wrenching shame washed over him, a feeling more real than any stock market report or profit margin. This wasn't charity, it was an emergency of the soul. He ignored the confused call of his name and took a deliberate step off the red carpet, away from the light and toward the shadows where the girl stood. It's in moments like this, when a life is about to be irrevocably altered, that we witness the true weight of our choices. If these stories of profound human connection move you, consider subscribing to our channel, as your support helps us share more of them. He led the small girl by the hand, her cold fingers barely wrapped around his own. As they crossed the threshold from the biting cold into the oppressive warmth of the ballroom, a wave of silence washed over the room, more powerful than the music that had just been playing. The string quartet faltered, a violin screeching to a halt mid-note. 100 pairs of eyes, all belonging to the city's most influential figures, turned to stare. They saw Miguel Gomez, their host, their peer, a titan of industry, holding the hand of a child who was the living embodiment of the world they had all worked so hard to keep outside. Her bare, dirty feet on the pristine marble floor were a violation, a stain on their perfect evening. The air grew thick with unspoken judgment, a collective gasp that hung in the perfumed atmosphere, sharp and suffocating. His wife, Helena was the first to move. She glided towards them, her silk gown rustling like dry leaves. Her smile a rigid mask of social grace that barely concealed the fury in her eyes. She placed a hand on Miguel's arm, her grip surprisingly strong, her painted nails digging slightly into the fabric of his tuxedo. "Miguel, what is the meaning of this?" she hissed, her voice a low, controlled whisper meant only for him. "This is Isabella's night. Are you trying to ruin it? Get her out of here, now!" But Miguel didn't look at his wife. He looked down at Lucia, who was trembling, her wide eyes darting from the towering floral arrangements to the faces that looked at her not with curiosity, but with a cold, detached disgust. He saw not a social embarrassment, but a terrified child who needed protection. Isabella, the birthday girl, stood frozen near the grand staircase, a princess in a gown of shimmering gold. Her friends whispered behind their hands, their laughter no longer polite, but sharp with mockery. For a moment, shame burned hot in her cheeks. This was her party, the one she had dreamed of for years, and her father had just turned it into a spectacle. Why was he doing this? Why did he have to bring the dirt of the street into her perfect fantasy? She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but then she saw the girl's face, the genuine fear in her eyes, and a flicker of something else, something uncomfortable and foreign, began to stir within her. It was a confusing mix of embarrassment and a nascent, unwelcome pang of empathy for the small intruder. Lucia felt like she had stepped into a dream that had quickly soured into a nightmare. The warmth she had craved from outside now felt stifling, and the beautiful light seemed to burn her eyes. A waiter offered her a delicate pastry from a silver tray, but the sight of the perfect, untouched food made her stomach clench. It was too much, too clean, too different from the reality she knew. She could feel the weight of every stare, each one a tiny needle pricking her skin. She tightened her grip on Miguel's hand, the only anchor in this overwhelming sea of wealth and disdain. She could smell the expensive perfumes, a cloying mix that made her dizzy, and hear the whispers that followed them like a swarm of angry bees. She just wanted to go back to the cold, familiar silence of the street. The scent of the lilies in the nearest arrangement, overpowering and funereal, transported Miguel decades back in time. He was no longer a billionaire in a ballroom, but a small boy in a cramped, damp room, watching his younger sister Anna cough into a thin blanket. He remembered her fascination with a single, wilted flower he had found for her, how she had treated it like a treasure. He remembered the worn-out dress she dreamed of wearing to a party she would never have, and the constant, gnawing hunger in their bellies. He remembered her feet, always cold, always bare, because they could only afford one pair of shoes, and they were his. The shame of that memory, of his inability to protect her, was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest and stealing his breath. "This is not a charity case, Miguel, it's a performance," Helena whispered venomously, pulling him aside, while a bewildered server led Lucia towards a velvet chair. "You are humiliating me. You are humiliating your daughter. Whatever guilt you are trying to appease, do it tomorrow. Do it with a check, like a normal person." Her words were sharp, designed to wound, to bring him back to the reality of their social standing. But her logic couldn't penetrate the thick fog of his past. He saw his sister's face superimposed over Lucia's, and the choice was no longer about social decorum. It was about righting a wrong that had haunted him for a lifetime. It's hard to stand for what's right when the world you built pushes back. If you believe in the power of these difficult choices, please consider subscribing. Your support is what allows us to keep telling these stories. Lucia sat on the edge of the plush chair, feeling as if she might sink into its depths and disappear. A woman with a stiff smile offered her a glass of sparkling juice in a tall, fragile-looking flute. Lucia took it with trembling hands, afraid she would drop it. The liquid was sweet and bubbly, a sensation so alien it was almost unpleasant. Then she overheard a fragment of conversation from a nearby table. "Can you imagine the diseases?" a woman murmured to her companion, casting a disgusted glance in Lucia's direction. The words, though not shouted, struck Lucia with the force of a slap. Diseases, dirt. She was a contamination in their perfect world. Suddenly, the room felt like it was closing in on her, the walls shrinking, the polite laughter turning into a monstrous roar. Panic seized her. She couldn't breathe. She carefully placed the glass on the floor, a silent apology for her intrusion, and slid off the chair. No one was looking directly at her at that moment. Miguel was still locked in a tense argument with his wife. Lucia saw her chance. She was small and quick, used to navigating crowded streets and disappearing into shadows. She slipped past a group of guests, her movements silent and practiced. She found a service door slightly ajar, leading to a quiet corridor. Without a second thought, she pushed it open and ran. She ran past the kitchens, past the startled staff, and out into the cold, unforgiving embrace of the night. The freedom of the freezing air on her skin was a relief, a baptism washing away the suffocating perfume of the party. When Miguel turned back, the chair was empty. A frantic search began, quiet and desperate at first, so as not to cause a bigger scene. But Lucia was gone. The half-empty glass of juice on the floor was the only evidence she had ever been there. A profound sense of failure crashed down on Miguel. He hadn't rescued her. He had taken a frightened child and thrown her into a cage of lions. He had used her to soothe his own conscience, without once considering how terrifying the experience would be for her. The opulence of the room now seemed grotesque, a monument to his own ignorance. He had failed again, just as he had failed Anna. Sometimes our best intentions can cause the most harm, and that realization is a heavy burden to carry. We're so grateful for everyone who subscribes, because it's your encouragement that helps us navigate these complex human moments together. Isabella watched the entire scene unfold from the staircase, her initial embarrassment slowly morphing into a dawning horror. She saw the panic on her father's face, an expression of raw, genuine fear she had never witnessed before. It wasn't the calculated worry of a CEO looking at a bad stock report. It was the primal fear of a man who had lost something precious. In that moment, he wasn't the distant, powerful figure she knew. He was just a father, terrified and broken. The whispers of her friends faded into irrelevance. The perfect party was a meaningless illusion. She walked down the stairs, her golden gown feeling suddenly heavy and absurd, and touched her father's arm. "I'll help you find her," she said, her voice clear and steady. Leaving the chaos of the party behind, Miguel and Isabella stepped back out into the São Paulo night. The red carpet now seemed like a cruel joke, a path to a world of hollow promises. Miguel had no idea where to even begin looking. He didn't know the city anymore, not this part of it. He had spent decades building walls of wealth and security to separate himself from the streets, and now he was hopelessly lost. Isabella, surprisingly, took the lead. She pulled out her phone, not to text her friends, but to look at a map, her mind working with a clarity that impressed him. She wouldn't have gone towards the main avenues, she reasoned. Too many lights, too many cars. She'd look for the quiet places, the alleys. Together, father and daughter ventured into the labyrinth of side streets behind the opulent neighborhood, a world of shadows and forgotten corners that existed just beyond the glow of the ballroom. The cold was more intense here, seeping through Miguel's expensive suit and Isabella's thin dress. For the first time, Miguel felt the same biting chill that Lucia must feel every single night. The sounds were different, too. The distant wail of a siren, the rattling of a loose shutter, the scuttling of unseen things in the darkness. Each dark alleyway held the potential for both hope and despair. He called her name, his voice hoarse, the sounds swallowed by the vast, indifferent city. The search was no longer just for a little girl. It was a desperate pilgrimage back to his own lost humanity. They found her in a narrow, dead-end alley, tucked away behind a row of overflowing dumpsters. The stench of wet cardboard and decay hung heavy in the air, a stark and brutal contrast to the perfumed atmosphere of the party they had just fled. Isabella was the one who saw her first, a small, still shape huddled in the deepest part of the shadows, illuminated only by the faint, distant glow of a streetlight. Lucia was curled into a tight ball against the cold brick wall, her thin arms wrapped around her knees. In her lap, held with a desperate sort of reverence, was the bouquet of roses he had bought from her, their vibrant red a splash of impossible life in the surrounding grime. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting there, perfectly still, as if trying to make herself so small that the world might finally overlook her completely. Miguel approached her slowly, his footsteps echoing softly on the broken pavement. He motioned for Isabella to stay back, his heart pounding with a terror that was entirely new to him. This wasn't the calculated risk of a business deal. This was the fragile, terrifying hope of a man on the brink of spiritual collapse. He didn't loom over her or try to coax her out with false promises. Instead, he lowered his large frame and sat on the cold, damp ground a few feet away, making himself small, making himself equal. He said nothing for a long time, simply sharing the silence and the cold with her. He could see the slight tremble in her shoulders, the way she clutched the roses as if they were her only shield against the world. He had brought her into his world, and it had broken her. "I had a sister once," he finally said, his voice quiet and rough with emotion he hadn't accessed in decades. "Her name was Anna. She was younger than you. We didn't have anything, not even shoes for the both of us. She used to draw pictures of beautiful dresses and fancy parties on scraps of paper. She dreamed of a night just like the one inside that ballroom, with music and lights and more food than she could ever eat." He paused, the memory a physical ache in his chest. "She never got to go to a party. She got sick, and the cold was too much for her. I see you with your bare feet on the cold ground, and all I can see is her. I see the little girl I couldn't protect." He looked directly at Lucia then, his eyes, stripped of all their corporate authority, now filled with a raw and pleading vulnerability. "I failed her, Lucia. I've spent my whole life running from that failure, building walls of money around myself so I would never feel that helpless again. But it was all a lie. When I saw you tonight, I realized I haven't been living, I've just been hiding." He shuffled closer, the sound of his expensive suit scraping against the concrete. "I don't want to just give you things. I want to give you a home, a family, if you'll let me." As he spoke, Isabella moved forward silently and draped her own expensive shawl over Lucia's trembling shoulders, a simple, unspoken promise. Lucia finally looked up, her large, dark eyes searching Miguel's face, then Isabella's. She saw no pity there, only a shared, profound sadness and a fragile, emerging hope. Her gaze dropped to the roses in her lap, then back to the man who looked more lost than she felt. For a moment, the alley was completely silent, holding the weight of 3 broken lives on the verge of becoming whole. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she offered him a single red rose from the bouquet. It wasn't a yes spoken in words, but it was an answer far more powerful. He took it, his hand closing over hers, a silent pact made in the cold and the dark. It is in these moments of pure connection that futures are rewritten. If you believe that everyone deserves a second chance at family, please subscribe and help us continue to bring these powerful stories to light. They didn't go back to the party. The sound of the string quartet and polite laughter felt like it belonged to another lifetime, a hollow echo from a world they had just permanently left behind. Miguel called his driver, and the 3 of them, a broken billionaire, his awakened daughter, and a little girl clutching a single rose, rode away in silence. The adoption paperwork was started the very next day. It was not a simple process, filled with legal hurdles. But Miguel pursued it with a relentless focus he had previously reserved for corporate takeovers. This was the most important acquisition of his life. Helena, unable to comprehend the radical shift in her husband, quietly moved out, choosing the sterile comfort of their social circle over the messy reality of this new family. It was a silent separation, leaving a space that was quickly filled not with emptiness, but with the quiet, hopeful work of building a home. The years that followed were a quiet reconstruction, not just of a family, but of a soul. The grand mansion, once a cold museum of success, slowly filled with the sounds of genuine laughter. Lucia blossomed, her initial timidness giving way to a bright, inquisitive spirit, nurtured by the unwavering love of a father and a sister she never knew she was missing. True to his promise, Miguel did more than just provide a home. He poured his resources and his formidable business acumen into creating the Roses Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing shelter, education, and a path forward for children living on the streets. His days were no longer spent in sterile boardrooms chasing profits, but in bustling community centers and city shelters, fighting for those the world had forgotten. The deep-set exhaustion in his eyes was replaced by a vibrant light, the spark of a man who had finally found his purpose. 5 years later, Miguel stood at the back of a crowded auditorium, a contented smile on his face. On stage, at the inauguration of the Foundation's third shelter, stood Lucia. Now, a poised 16-year-old, she spoke with a passion that captivated the room, sharing her story not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the power of compassion. She was no longer the girl in the shadows, but a beacon of hope for hundreds of other children. Beside Miguel, Isabella, who now served as the Foundation's executive director, watched her sister with tears of pride in her eyes. She had traded a life of debutante balls for one of profound meaning, finding a strength she never knew she possessed. The two sisters had saved each other, and in doing so, they had saved their father from the gilded cage he had built for himself. Later that evening, as they left the event, a familiar scene played out on a nearby corner. A young boy, no older than Lucia had been, was trying to sell small boxes of candy to passing cars. He was small, ignored, and shivering slightly in the evening chill. Miguel stopped, and his eyes met Lucia's. No words were needed. It was a look of shared history, of a promise that extended far beyond one little girl in an alley. Together, they walked towards the boy, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding. The cycle of pain had been broken, replaced by a cycle of hope that was now their family's true legacy. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Stories like this remind us that a single moment of connection can change the world, and by subscribing, you help us continue to prove it, one story at a time.